This is the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandez, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show. Welcome to a new episode of the Christian Circle podcast. Today we have a new guest. We have Deacon Ed Shoener, who's the author of the book When a Loved One Dies by Suicide. Deacon Ed, can you talk to us and tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry?
Sure. Thank you for having me on this podcast, Pamela. I am a permanent deacon in the Diocese of Scranton in Pennsylvania. I was ordained many years ago in 2004, so I've been doing this for over 2 decades now. Time goes by. I'm married. I have a beautiful wife of 47 years now, Ruth, 4 children, one with the Lord, as we'll be talking about my daughter, Katie, and 8 grandchildren. I work in and spend a lot of time in supporting a new ministry in the church called Mental Health Ministry. And it's a ministry of accompaniment and support to those who are struggling with mental health challenges and mental illnesses and their families and their loved ones who support them.
Okay. So your book actually speaks very directly to those people who are living with grief that is complicated by shock, by guilt, unanswered questions. What makes grief after suicide different from other forms of loss? And what do you do most? What do you want survivors to know early on?
Whenever you lose a loved one, of course, it's very difficult. It's a shock, especially if it's a child or if it's an unexpected death. And I would say to anyone who's grieving, especially grieving the loss of a loved one, that it's something you don't get over. It's something, however, with the grace of God, you learn to live with. And the true miracle of our faith is that we believe in the resurrection and eternal life. So when our loved one dies, it's not like they disappear into the ether and no longer exist. They very much still exist, just like those of us living on earth exist, albeit those who have died exist in a different way, which we, of course, on this side of heaven don't completely understand. But Christ has told us very clearly that our loved ones still exist. What's particularly different at times, and quite often, I guess, about losing someone to suicide is all the stigma and misunderstanding that surrounds mental health, mental illness, suicide, and it can bring a great deal of guilt. It can bring even additional pain and suffering layered on top of the suffering that person's already experiencing from the loss of their loved one. And it's the type of challenge that you really need to bring to God in order to be able to find the hope and healing that you need to find after the death of a loved one by suicide. I can say this about what the church used to teach versus what the church teaches now, because that feeds into a lot of this feeling of guilt that's, in particular, so many Catholics experience. In the old days, and we're talking going back to the early part of the 20th century and earlier, the church came within inches, let's say, metaphorically, within inches of teaching that someone who died by suicide is probably going to go to hell. Of course, the church never says definitively anyone goes to hell, but it certainly said the teaching certainly could lead one to believe that their very next step is into the gates of hell. So that created great fear, great stigma. And, I still encounter people who lost a loved one to suicide, say in the 1970s or even into the 1980s, who believe that that's what the church still teaches. But that's not what the church teaches, because of greater insights that afforded us by modern psychology and psychiatry, and the church's continuing reflection on mental illness and suicide. The church now has a more nuanced and a more hopeful teaching on suicide. So the church now teaches that, of course, you shouldn't kill yourself, shouldn't kill anyone. Life is a gift from God. However, the church also recognizes that circumstances due to mental illness, due to pain, extreme suffering, extreme hardship can cloud a person's judgment and ability to understand and to discern properly, and to even understand whether their actions are right or wrong. And so therefore, the church says this, that quite often the responsibility of a person dying by suicide, their responsibility is diminished. And the church now prays for people who have died by suicide. When I say diminished, it goes to the basic teaching of mortal sin. In
Mm.
order for there to be a mortal sin and to be separated from God, it has to be grave matter. And certainly suicide is grave matter, but it has to be done with the full knowledge and consent of the will. And basically, what the church is teaching in regard to suicide is that most people who die from suicide are under such stress because of their mental illness or because of other factors in their life that they are just not thinking clearly, to put it
Mm.
in a layperson's term. And what they're doing is something that's irrational. And I think that's true. That's true not just theologically, but that's been true in my experience of
Mm.
talking to people that have died by suicide. Nobody wants to die by suicide.
Yeah.
Everyone that I have talked to that has attempted suicide and, of course, survived, they had to a person said to me, "I am so glad I did not die.
Mm.
I don't know what I was thinking when I did this, but I'm so glad I did not die." And in fact, even my daughter Katie died by suicide when she was 29, back in 2016, and she struggled with bipolar disorder, which you may know is a mental disorder that can cause moments of mania where you're
Mm.
kind of totally detached from reality. At moments Katie thought her brain controlled all the computers in the city and things like that that are totally detached from reality. But more often, Katie and so many people with bipolar disorder suffer from extreme bouts of depression.
Mm.
And that happened with Katie many times. And she did attempt suicide previously to her death. And she told us, her family, that she was afraid of suicide. She did not want to die by suicide. It scared her, the thought of suicide. And she was seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist. She even had a suicide prevention plan.
Mm.
Such things exist within the mental health field. But nevertheless, these illnesses are relentless. And sadly, she died by suicide.
So many families and friends usually wrestle with the what if, in hindsight, what could have we done? All these questions, the self-blame. So how can people, especially families, gently loosen the grip of guilt while still honoring their love for the person who died?
Yeah, this issue of guilt, particularly when there's a death by suicide, is something that teaches us great humility, right? And by that I mean we'd like to think we could have done something, that we some sort of had special powers that to look into the thinking and the mind of someone who died by suicide, and that in some heroic way we could have prevented the suicide. I wish that was true. I wish that was true, and I wish we had those powers. But we have to be very humble and realize that we don't have those powers. We
Mhm.
can't know what our loved one was thinking at the moment of their suicide. And we just kind of have to let go of that and try to turn that sense of guilt over to God and realize that we are mere human beings. And whatever was going on in our loved one's mind or in their life at the time of that they died by suicide, our Lord Jesus Christ understands what was happening. Jesus Christ understands what was going through their minds, what they were thinking, because, Pamela, Christ is the best psychologist
Yeah.
and psychiatrist that has ever existed and will ever exist. Christ understands what happened.
Yeah.
And we, with great hope, can accept that Christ understands. This side of heaven, I tell everyone who's grieving a suicide that you will never know. We will never know
Mm.
why our loved one died by suicide. We just have to accept that fact that we will never definitively know. We might have some guesses, we might have some thoughts, but we don't know. We don't know. We weren't in their minds, we weren't present there. So try to, as best you can, let it go with the assurance that Christ understands and that Christ was as even more sorrowful and cried even more than either my wife or I did in the day
Mm.
Katie died for me. And I'm sure that's the case for everyone who died by suicide, because our loved ones were not made to die by suicide.
Mm.
They were made as the beautiful creations of God. But there's sin and illness and sickness in the world, and these things happen, death occurs. So, as in all things, give it over to Christ, turn it to Christ, and ask Christ to heal you as time goes by.
Mm. So I've noticed, especially in faith communities, and I've seen this very often in our own Catholic communities, as recent as maybe the year before. Silence and stigma is often surrounding this issue of suicide. And a lot of times the entire community is thinking back and wondering, what could we have done? Or in the meantime, in the entire process, they're either doing something right or they're doing something wrong. In your opinion, what does healthy, faithful accompaniment look like when someone is grieving a death by suicide? And what responses, even well intended ones, are actually harmful or not even necessary at that time for the family?
Well, I tell you, when our Katie died, people were very nice, very kind, but quite often people don't know what to say. I can particularly remember that Katie's first suicide attempt back when she was in high school. She was very popular in high school, president of her honor society, captain of the soccer team, very involved and very much loved by her classmates. But she had this illness, this bipolar disorder. And just out of the blue, neither Ruth or I knew she was dealing with this mental illness. She attempted suicide in her senior year in high school,
Mhm.
which was just totally unexpected. And I tell you, Ruth and I didn't know what to make of it, but our community even didn't know what to make of it. Their high school community didn't know what to make of it. And what we encountered was just silence. When
Mhm.
we came back, people weren't mean to us or anything like that. There was just silence. They said nothing
Mhm.
to us. I guess out of fear of perhaps saying the wrong thing. I guess perhaps out of fear of even talking about suicide. But that was the one thing I remember from Katie's first suicide attempt. Just the deafening silence.
Mhm.
Nobody reaching out to us and supporting us or comforting us in any way. After Katie actually did die by suicide, and I want to quickly add this: she lived a good 10 years from her first suicide
Mhm.
attempt to when she did, in fact, die by suicide. And I attribute that to the good psychotherapy, the good psychiatric medicines that she received, to giving us 10 years with Katie. Because I'm sure if she didn't have that therapy and medicines, she would have died by suicide much earlier.
Mhm.
Just like chemotherapy doesn't cure every cancer, as we all know that people, even with the best medical care, die of their cancers. The same is true with in a way with these mental illnesses and suicide. But the care that Katie got gave her more time,
Mhm.
just like chemotherapy can give many people more time. Maybe they will die eventually by cancer, but they get more time. So I want to quickly add that to anyone listening to this. There is no shame in getting psychotherapy,
Mhm.
taking psychotropic drugs. All of these medicines and things are gifts from God, and we should take full advantage of them. And what I would just say to communities is just try to break down the stigma, try not to be afraid to talk about these issues, mental health and suicide, and because getting these things out into the open, out into the light,
Mhm.
helps everybody to better understand these things and come up with better ways to address them, come up with better government policies, more funding,
Yeah.
all those sorts of things to try to get a better handle on these mental illnesses.
And I'm glad you mentioned writing to your government and getting them involved because I know in the state of Rhode Island, mental health resources are actually dwindling. If anything, because of staff and issues with finances, we're under a lot of pressure here and the resources are just drying up here.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking, isn't it, Pamela? That is just
Very.
heartbreaking to see those resources dry up. They're so badly needed. I mean, I think, you know, in our American culture, there's this sense of rugged individualism and pull yourself up by your boots and
Mm,
take care of things yourself. And that's good in many respects. That, of course, is good. But when you're dealing with these mental illnesses, you just can't do that.
yeah.
When you're in extreme depression or when you're in bouts of mania, or if you're living with psychosis, when you have schizophrenia or some other of these illnesses, you need the help of a community. You need the
Yeah.
support of the community. And it's just a shame to see those resources diminishing. It is just heartbreaking. We need to speak up, speak to our legislators, speak to our government leaders, that this is something that we won't tolerate, that we just have to find better resources and better care.
Mm. Moving on to our next question, I think you talked in your book entirely about not forgetting or moving on. It's not just healing is not just going to come from those things. How can survivors actually integrate this loss into their lives in a way that allows meaning, in a way that allows moments of peace over time? Because as you know, grief is longitudinal, but it has its highs and its lows, and it's very hard to even find peace over time.
Yes, that is certainly true. Yes. Grief doesn't end at the funeral, as you said. I mean, in many ways, the grief journey starts at the
Yeah,
funeral because you're
exactly.
just in so much shock
Yeah.
between the death and the actual funeral that you haven't really even had time to start to try to process it and see what your life is going to be like without your loved one. But as Paul says in Romans, God can turn everything to the good.
Yes.
God can turn everything to the good, that even death by suicide. So as time goes by, and people who recently lost someone to suicide or any death finds this hard to believe when I say this, but as time goes by, God will use your grief
Mm.
and will use your loss to help other people.
Yes.
I am certainly much more empathetic now,
Mm.
certainly have a deeper understanding and compassion for people that have lost a loved one by
Mm.
suicide or any other means than I did before Katie died. And God has put many, many people into my life that I can help, that I can talk to, that I can support. And I see that happen with so many other people too. Is this that God works in ways that are hard for us to understand.
Mm.
But, as we believe in the Catholic faith, suffering can draw anyone closer to God.
Yeah.
And it does. It does. On a personal level, the word peace is a hard word to wrap your head around when you're grieving a loved one by suicide. You learn to live with it. I guess you could say you have a certain peace based on acceptance of
Mm.
it. You learn to accept the death. You learn to accept the fact that they died by suicide. You learn to understand that Christ is with them and Christ understands why they died by suicide.
Mm.
But I'll tell you, Pamela, a day does not go by when
Mm.
I don't miss Katie. And some days, and any parent who's lost a child will tell you this after a couple years, some days it seems like it was a million years ago
Mm.
when she was alive and then she died. But then the next day, it seems like it was yesterday or
Mm.
even this morning. It seems it comes right back that you're there almost at the moment that you heard about their death.
Mm.
So that's just a reality of how we live with this grief, and to just be prepared for it and accept it and live your life well. I always advise people of this though too. If your grief starts to disrupt your life, starts to make it hard for you to work or maintain relationships in your family, I know this grief can put a great strain on marriages.
Mm.
I've seen marriages break up after these type of deaths. There's no shame. There's absolutely no shame in seeing a therapist or a counselor to talk these things through and try to find ways to help manage your grief. Therapy and counseling, just like all medicine, is a gift from God. So I certainly encourage people, if they're struggling severely, to see a therapist or a counselor. The other thing that we do here in our parish in Scranton, and I know many parishes do it around the country and around the globe, is offer grief support groups where it's not counseling or therapy, but it's where people can gather together, share their feelings and thoughts, and pray together in these spiritual grief support groups. So that's something I think many people could look into as to what's available locally in the way of support groups.
Mm.
And as far as suicide goes, you mentioned the book. We've also taken that book and created a series of films, short films
Mm.
that are presented by the various authors in the book. And you can go to our webpage. You can look at them for free. We have a facilitator's guide and a participant guide if you want to have a small group. And it just gives you a chance to hear from other people that have lost someone to suicide, leaders in the Catholic Church who have lost someone to suicide and how their faith has supported them in that grief. So go to our webpage. These films are also available on Formed, which is a Catholic television resource, and also through a group called Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. And also, now that I'm thinking about it, even at the webpage where our book is published, Ave Maria Press.
Mm.
So these films are widely available, and our intent of putting the films up was to help people process their grief, help people listen to Bishop Dolan, who's lost 3 siblings and a brother-in-law to suicide, how he dealt with it. Monsignor Pope, who many people know because of his writings, he lost a sister to suicide, and other people within the church, how they dealt with this loss.
Let me just remind people about the two things that struck me from what you said. So if your grief is paralyzing you, you cannot eat, you cannot work, you cannot function on a daily basis, it's probably a good idea to get help, to go to therapy, get a counselor, talk to your spiritual director. There's no harm in doing that. And get help. There is help available at various parishes. And if you don't know, ask your local parish priest, or just go to the church, go to the nuns, ask somebody for help and let them know that you're struggling.
I want to add quickly, Pamela, to your perhaps to your audience. If you're struggling, that is not a sign of weak faith or some sort of failing. It's a sign that you're a human being. And that's all it's a sign of. And God does, like I said earlier, and as you're saying now, is that God can put good people into your lives, well-trained therapists and counselors that can help you through this.
Yeah. And the second thing that I also wanted to add is that usually grief makes us think about how we're living our life. And if you didn't have a ministry before, maybe now is the time to think of how can I make a difference, in the few years that I have left. So this may be a turning point for you to help other people who may be on the verge of going through the same experience, or who are going through this experience, or who may go through it in the future. So those are two things that I think I took out from
Yes, you can offer a suicide support group in your parish. You don't need to be an expert or a therapist to do this. Like I said, all the resources to do it are on our webpage. And again, I emphasize it's spiritual support. The other thing is to consider starting a mental health ministry in your parish.
Yes.
To more broadly address these issues that are quite often behind suicide, and to break down the stigma and the misunderstanding about mental illness and suicide so that we can talk about it and support each other, pray with each other, educate each other about this topic, and just get rid of this silly but yet persistent stigma around this issue, particularly quite often, to be honest with you, in faith communities. People where we somehow, like I was alluding to earlier, somehow some people think it's because you don't have enough faith or something like that, that you're struggling with depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts. It's not that. It's like I said, it's because you're a human being, and we need to just help each other and support each other as best we can. And the mental health ministry is a good way to do that. Our webpage is catholicmhm.org. All the resources on it are free, and there's all sorts of ways we can provide support if someone would like to start a ministry like that in their parish community.
So for listeners who are actually walking alongside someone grieving a suicide, or those who are grieving themselves, what practices of prayer or support, or, your own meditation would you encourage, especially in the months after the initial shock fades?
Well, one, to realize you can't fix it. There's nothing you can do to fix it. Absolutely nothing you can do. Death is final. That's the most final thing any of us will ever encounter in this earth. There's absolutely nothing you can do. So what you can do, however, is just accompany people, be with them, talk to them, invite them out. Don't ignore them. Don't poke them with the proverbial 10-foot pole. You can draw close to them and give them a hug. And don't be afraid to talk about their loved one who died by suicide. Sometimes you have to, ask me to stop talking about Katie. And anyone who has lost a loved one to suicide, for the most part, loves talking about their departed loved one. They don't want them to be forgotten. You're not going to bring up something. If you ask them or talk to them about the loved one who died by suicide, you're not going to open up an old wound as if they forgot their loved one died by suicide. I mean, certainly it's not like something you forget. So talking to someone about it is always a good thing to do. So that's my basic advice, is just talk about it, take it to prayer, and try to get over the stigma, and just humbly accept our limits on what we can and cannot understand, and what we can and cannot do. Just be very humble about the whole thing.
Okay. So, if people want to get in touch with you or find your book or all of these resources, I know you mentioned it earlier, where can they write to you or find you online?
Well, you can find us online. That's how ministries are done these days, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, St. Francis walked from village to village. Now, ministries, we all have web pages. So we certainly have a web page. You can Google us or do an internet search engine for Catholic Mental Health Ministry. You will find us. We're the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers. Like I said, all the resources are free. The books were published by Ave Maria Press. So, you can find them wherever you buy books. Amazon, Goodreads, wherever you find books, the books are sold. They, of course, there's a price for them. So when you log on to your wherever you buy books, you'll see what that price is. It's available in paperback. To be honest with you, I'm not even sure what the price is, but it's in the like $12 to $20 range, somewhere in that range. The books
Okay.
are. So yeah, please go to our website, and if you want to order a book, go to Ave Maria Press or one of the online bookstores.
Okay, great. So, do you have any last words of advice?
Just understand that God understands suicide.
Mm.
God understands why our loved ones died by suicide, and our loved ones fell into the loving arms of Christ. He wept on the day that they died, and He understands, and He's with them, and He will bring them healing, and also bring us healing, those of us that are still on God's good green earth.
Well, great. This was great. And thank you for joining us on today's podcast and for sharing your story, sharing all about Katie and all the things that you're doing to help other people as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pamela, for having me. This is an important topic to be able to discuss in the open. Thank you so much.